Hi, I'm Brett Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. Thank you for joining us today for a special Sunday edition of RegWatch. I'll be introducing you to our guest in just a moment. But first, hysteria over the Wuhan coronavirus has exploded across the West. And when we characterize it here at RegWatch that it's a hysteria, we mean just that. COVID-19 is no different than any number of countless scare stories manufactured by the progressive left over the past decades in order to wrench power from the people and hand it over to unaccountable government bodies. It's a strong editorial position and one which RegWatch shall back up. But first, before the COVID-19 hysteria gripped the West, Canada was dealing with a national crisis that left many commentators, including myself, saying enough is enough. And that is the best way to describe the motivating passion behind conservative commentator Aaron Gunn, who joins us here today. His crusade to free Canada from the lethal grip of extreme left-wing ideology has actually made a very big impact on social media sites like Facebook. He has deeply embedded himself within Canada's conservative social media movement. He's produced scores of videos, earning over 25 million views, and he challenges the left on major issues such as erasing of Canada's history, free speech, law and order, and the protests over the Coastal GasLink pipeline project. Aaron, thanks for joining us today on RegWatch.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we're going to dive into the issues here in Canada first, and we'll zoom back over to COVID-19 at the latter half of the show. But first off, let's talk about what happened with You Vic. First, give us an idea of where you're from. You are from Victoria. You Vic's your alma mater, and you just got deplatformed essentially from a major speech, correct?
Yeah, so I'm from Victoria. That's where I'm based. That's where I grew up. That's the university I went to and graduated from, got a degree in a Bachelor of Commerce. And while I do my political videos all across the country, particularly here in BC, Victoria is still where I managed to call home. So keeping an eye on the city council and some of the craziness that happens as part of Victoria politics is definitely part of what I'm doing on a daily basis. So there's a free speech club at the university. It's run by a young man named Levi, who I didn't know before this, and he reached out to me over my Facebook page and asked if I would be willing to come and speak about the other side of the Wet'suwet'en protests and the Coastal GasLink pipeline debate. And I said, sure, of course. I'm happy to do it. Always happy to come and speak to especially young people who want to learn the other side of the story. And I was expecting it just to be, a handful, a couple dozen people. Might put the invitation out to some followers, but nothing super spectacular. And then what happened is kind of the left-wing enviro mob there at You Vic. It's kind of like the rent-a-protester that seemed to be protesting something different every week, caught wind of it, started spam posting the Facebook page, and proceeded to try to get You Vic to shut the event down by claiming there was going to be some kind of violent confrontation. And they were successful in doing that because You Vic capitulated immediately rather than try to see the event go forward and defend their students' right to freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry.
So for our viewers to better understand who may have not seen your videos, and we'll show a couple here real soon, characterize the kind of commentary that you make and then why that might have been problematic here for You Vic.
So I think what makes it problematic for You Vic is the fact that kind of that far left mob, the same people that were blockading the legislature, trying to blockade John Horgan, the premier's house, et cetera, really don't like my content. Now, for this issue specifically, I'm unapologetically pro Coastal GasLink and pro Trans Mountain as well. And I think what really annoys them is the fact that I kind of point out their hypocrisy and the fact that they're just using First Nations as pawns to try to further their radical environmental agenda. All 20 elected First Nation bands, obviously everyone who's probably watching this video knows this, along the pipeline route support the project. But yet they're out with placards saying stand up for Indigenous rights and it's a bunch of kind of white hipsters from Victoria shutting down highways to try to prove a point that doesn't even make any sense. So that's kind of what I was pointing out for them, and they don't like that very much. So, but they don't have an argument back for it because the facts are on this side. So what they do is they try to deplatform you and take away your right to speak. So that's their strategy. And I mean, given their options, I don't blame them, because kind of a full, honest, truthful debate definitely wouldn't be in their best interest.
And that, well, that is well said, as far as I'm concerned. I've got the video you did here, the truth about illegal blockades in Canada, and it should be queued up here. So bear with. It's always an audio roller coaster ride here on RegWatch as we're integrating new gear. So let's just give this a shot here. 1 second.
It's been set up and completely shut down Highway 17.
And that, well, that is well said, as far as I'm concerned. I've got the video you did here, the truth about illegal blockades in Canada, and it should be queued up here. So bear with. It's always an audio roller coaster ride here on RegWatch as we're. It always is a roller coaster ride. I cannot monitor our chat. That's the issue. All right, good to go. Here, we're happy now. Here, 1 sec. Unbelievable. There we go.
Okay, we're here at the illegal blockade, which you can see just over there, that's been set up and completely shut down Highway 17, the Pat Bay Highway here in Victoria. You can see, if you just turn around there, it's been completely abandoned. It's actually quite eerie. That's because police have diverted traffic down a bunch of smaller roads on either side that are, as of right now, completely clogged up. And those are individuals heading to the airport, to the ferries, trying to catch flights, etc., etc. And at a certain point, I think we just have to say enough is enough. These have been sprouting out across the country, and quite frankly, I don't think these individuals even know what they're protesting. They say they're standing up for Indigenous rights. All 20 elected First Nation bands along the pipeline route support the project. A majority of people of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation, the Haisla First Nation, you name it, support the project. And I'm actually tired of the media referring to those people as protesters. If they want to go 50 feet to the left or 50 feet to the right, they can protest all they want on the side of highways, roads, in front of the legislature. Go for it. Everybody supports that. But this, erecting illegal blockades that infringe on the rights of your fellow citizens, whether it's here in Victoria, whether it's the GOAT trains in Toronto or on a highway in Quebec, that's not on. That needs to end. We have to get the rule of law back in this country. We live in a democracy. People vote in elections. This is not how we get our point across.
And that's a strong point there, Aaron. That's not, so you're making the point that what they're doing is the wrong way to get the point across. Why do you feel so strongly that that's the case?
Because we live in a democracy, as I was saying. Everybody else has strongly held views for and against the pipeline in different provinces of this country, but you don't see everybody else going to blockade and infringe on the rights of their fellow citizens every time you don't get what or they don't get what they want, or you don't get what you want as part of the public policy debate and implementation process in this country. So I think really it's childish what they're doing, but it has real consequences for everyday people. That particular video that you just showed, they were blockading the main highway in Victoria that goes to the airport, that goes to the ferries, that goes to the local Saanich Peninsula Hospital. So there wasn't just any road. It was the key artery that left traffic backed up throughout the city. So I don't think it's legitimate at all, and they're just trying to do whatever they can do to get attention. And quite frankly, I think it's kind of embarrassing that this government and the provincial governments didn't do something about it sooner.
And then who do you think is behind it? Is this just a natural kind of demonstration here that's going on, or are there organized efforts to disrupt Canada's economy and resource sector in order to achieve some larger goal?
Yeah, so there's people that are organizing it at the top. These aren't spontaneous. There was no spontaneous protests that just suddenly came out of nowhere like they'd have you believe. There's people that are organizing these things that are paid by various groups, a lot of which receive their funding from U.S. foundations, et cetera, et cetera. But now that's not to say, an important thing to point out is they are true believers. These people really, they might not know why they're there exactly, but they believe they're doing the right thing and they're part of some greater movement, and that they're the victims of of capitalism and colonialism and all of these things. So they might not be able to articulate it, but they believe they're there for some reason. But and I think that actually goes to where this conversation is going to end up heading, is with that fact that a lot of these people are at the University of Victoria and our various educational institutions, and their heads are not, these kind of radical ideas are not challenged, and they're not open to different points of view, and then they end up believing in ridiculous policies and are unable to articulate what they're doing there.
One of them here, we have Stop Colonialism, and you mentioned that. What's your understanding of their desire here, their demand?
With regard to the illegal blockades?
With regard to Stop Colonialism.
Well, I think the colonialism thing it's just kind of this, it's like the Canadian version, the Canadian importation of kind of victim culture and trying to play politics with different groups, identity politics. So colonialism is just one of these things where I think people that have been, especially people that have problems in their lives or whatever grievance against the state, is just like it's a convenient excuse. Blaming colonialism is something that happened 500 years ago. So I think it's obviously ridiculous, but it's a narrative that also doesn't get challenged in the mainstream media enough, and just pointing out what a ridiculous assertion that is. But really, these people are just, most of them there in British Columbia at least, are environmental protesters who don't even know it's a natural gas pipeline, who don't know or don't care that all First Nations along the pipeline are all elected bands support the project. And it's just these environmentalists who are latching onto this particular cause.
Now, you've been covering this here in British Columbia, but obviously this is a national issue. The protests that were held and rail blockades in support of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs shut down national rail traffic for many weeks and caused a huge heartache for the Canadian economy in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and obviously affected a lot of individual people too as well. What's your sense in terms of being around these protesters? And we're going to play the video in a second here where you actually tried to talk to them. Why don't you set that up for us a little bit? My question is that, when you talk to them, do they have anything to say with regard to the impact that they're having?
Yeah, so earlier in the week that this video was filmed, I'm presuming the one that you're about to show, I had gone to the legislature here in Victoria, where they had attempted to blockade the media, MLAs, their staff from actually entering the legislature here, the people's place of governance. And it was quite a chaotic, borderline violent energy that was in the crowd. There were, I don't know, 300 or 400 people there. And so this was a couple days after that, and they had decided that they were going to launch this protest called hashtag shut down the government, which was to protest various ministry buildings throughout Victoria where all the government workers work. So a lot of the government workers just ended up not coming in to begin with. But I decided to approach multiple protests that they have set up outside different ministries, try to talk to the protesters as if they could articulate what they were doing here, to answer some of the basic questions like how do you say you're standing up for Indigenous rights while at the same time all 20 elected bands support the pipeline? Do you know what's in the pipeline? These kind of basic questions. And what you'll see is that most of them, because this is a very top-down organizing effort, they've been told not to speak to the media or to anybody unless you're one of the approved spokespeople. So that's kind of the background to that, and you can kind of see that play out.
Okay,
and,
so let's give it a watch on. Perfect setup. Very good.
Hey, it's Aaron here in Victoria. Once again, protesters are out protesting the Coastal GasLink pipeline for what they say is a show of support for Indigenous rights for the Wet'suwet'en people. Over the past couple days, there's been a legal blockade set up across the country, rail lines, ports, highways, bridges. Right now, they're camped out outside of a couple buildings. If you look over here, you'll see one of the buildings. all these different ministry buildings across the city. So what we're going to do now is go and try to talk to some of these protesters to find out why they're opposing the Coastal GasLink pipeline, especially when it has the support of all 20 elected band councils along the pipeline route. Would anyone like to say why they don't support the Coastal GasLink pipeline? Would anyone like to say why they don't support the Coastal GasLink pipeline?
My name's Aaron Gunn, proud boy, proud BC, proud BC.
Would anyone like to say why they don't support the Coastal GasLink pipeline?
Don't
We put it on.
Guy.
And just to kind of help them try to understand, because sometimes it doesn't work so well, I brought a visual which actually shows every single band that has supports and approves the pipeline across northern British Columbia. 20 First Nation bands along the pipeline route all support the project. All support the project. Haisla Band. What else we got? Blueberry River Band, Burns Lake, Wet'suwet'en First Nations. So we got our own personal escort here. Do you guys have anything you'd like to say? This map doesn't look that complicated, though. All 20 elected First Nation bands along. Oh, we're fascists now. If you disagree with them, you stand up for Indigenous rights, and the 20 elected First Nation bands, you call them fascists.
Oh, that was great. That was really, really good. So what did you say there? That they started calling you a fascist? Is that what happened?
Yeah, there's the one guy. There's other stuff you actually don't see as well. So they started calling
Justin
me,
Trudeau has just been found guilty of breaking federal law.
What you can't see off screen is there's
On August 14th, the Ethics Commissioner, Mario Dion, found that Trudeau broke Section 9 of the Conflict of Interest Act for his attempts to pressure the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to abandon the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin.
This is like breaching a constitutional principle of prosecutorial independence.
Kind of disconcerting, but
Sorry, taking pictures of your car, you said? 1 second?
yeah, and license plate and stuff like that. Just the one guy calling me the fascist in that video. He's a super creep. He's one of like the main organizers, and he was the one. I think he just got, he got invited into the legislature to meet with the minister, and then refused to leave and got arrested. And he just does it every week.
Yeah, it's a mix. These protesters, some of them seem to be taken advantage of. Would be my characterization.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I would say there's a mix of kind of the true hardcore believers. Those are the people that are really radical. Those are the people that you can see yelling at me, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a bunch of people, a lot of them I think are probably UVic poly students or whatever, who are just pro-environment, and they care about the environment as we all do. And they've been basically told that this pipeline is really bad and evil, and that it's big bad capitalists to blame, and you should come out and protest and show your support. So I think that's the two groups of people. It's kind of the radical, the radical ringleaders, and the people that get to follow them.
So this environmental belief, what do you think it really is? Because it appears, I always like to do one of these things. If you don't really know what's behind the cause, you look at the effect. And their effect, the effect that they've had is effectively shut down $150 billion of investment into our resource economy over the last 10, 15 years. And that's massive. That puts us straight on the path to be Venezuela. I don't see how it couldn't, right? If we are unable to extract our resources and put them on the global market, we will be Venezuela. Yeah,
so they're obviously the people that are, again, it's like a collection of people with grievances. So there's a lot of radical environmentalists who believe the world's going to end in 10 years if we don't make dramatic changes, and that's one cohort of people. There's the kind of indigenous anti-colonialists who are still trying to rewrite history from 500 years ago. So those two groups have kind of joined up. And then there's the third group, which is kind of the anti-everything, anti-capitalist, anti-business, anti-development that have literally been around. Probably for as long as human history has existed, these people have found a cause to protest. So I feel like it's a group of those three that have kind of come together. And you see that manifest differently in different provinces, but yeah, I think that's what's going on. So it's not necessarily a uniform movement by any means.
And then let's bring climate change into this. How big of a deal is that in terms of motivating this effort? Because of course, this particular protest was framed around RCMP get off of Wet'suwet'en lands. This is, in support of the hereditary chiefs and so forth. There was not a lot of climate change signage and so forth on this particular protest. It was pretty narrow targeted.
Yeah, I think they did that for, it was obviously for strategic reasons. I don't know if it was a smart strategic decision on their part, but they decided to play that card. It was kind of it's an intellectually very weak card because all of the bands along the pipeline route supported the project. But I think they thought that would be an easier hill to stand on, potentially because it was a natural gas pipeline that, of course, is going to export gas to the Asian economies to displace coal and really high emission fuel sources. So that could have been why they made that decision. But that is the majority of people that were there. That's why they were there, even if they didn't say it. No one's concerned about a natural gas spill that doesn't even really exist. Nobody is. Everybody who looks at the facts even remotely knows this is a huge economic opportunity for First Nations in the area. It's got broad First Nation support. So really, the only thing it leaves is people that are so strongly anti-fossil fuels and hydrocarbons that they have to protest every possible project because they think that if we don't get off of all this stuff in the next 10 years, the world's going to collapse and die. So unless you fall in that bubble, protesting the pipeline doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, and it's concerning. I mean, it's very concerning that these protests were able to shut down our economy like they did. And there's always the threat of increased action down the road that could even be far worse. And, we've had some people on our show over the last several weeks that have made, specific comments that these are, there's a lot of foreign influence too as well. Our position, of course, is that this is a progressive movement. This is the left. This is definitely a political action that's going on. But they've got their effect over the last several years on plenty of different areas. So let's jump to the issue that really put your name on the map, if you could say it that way. And that was the issue around the statue in Victoria. What was that?
So, how was that 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now?
Yeah.
The mayor of Victoria, along with the council, which is as left wing as any in the entire country, if not more, decided out of nowhere, without any public consultation or debate, to tear down the statue of Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, from outside of City Hall. And that caused a huge uproar, both here in Victoria and across the country. It was broadly unpopular, and of course they proceeded to try to tear it down as quickly as possible to avoid any criticism of it. We arranged a big counter-protest, did a bunch of videos outside, both before they tore it down and as they were tearing it down. And it's still a shameful, sad chapter in the history of the city. And there you can see it right there being carted away. I don't think it's still in hiding. Last time I checked. So that's really what, and by the way, that's all connected to this because, of course, that's the anti-colonialism thing. That's the bizarre notion that the only way we're going to bring this country together is by tearing monuments down of our past, which, of course, doesn't bring people together. It drives them further apart. So just pointing out the hypocrisy of that and the craziness of it, I think. And by the way, it also goes to show how well the kind of radical left is at organizing on a local level for municipal politics. The Victoria City Council is a perfect manifestation of that.
Exactly. So let's watch your video right now.
This time it's here in Victoria, where a radical council led by Mayor Lisa Helps is tearing down this statue of our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. Is this really what political correctness has come to? Expunging our history, erasing our past. Toppling a monument to the father of Confederation, who united us, built our country, and delivered on the audacious promise of a national railway. Was he perfect? No. But no one is. He held views on race and residential schools that, while commonplace in the 19th century, are no longer acceptable. But that progress we've made since is what makes Canada what it is today. That doesn't mean we have to tear down what came before us. It doesn't mean we have to erase our past. And it certainly doesn't mean we have to be ashamed of the country we call home. Canada, for all its faults, is the greatest country in the world. And without Sir John A. Macdonald, it's a country that wouldn't even exist. So instead of trying to pretend like our past didn't happen, let's embrace it, celebrating our achievements while learning from our mistakes. And for goodness sakes, leave the statue alone.
Nice. Very good. Very good. You're a good writer.
Yeah, well, that video, I actually remember. I was coming home from I was playing some hockey with some buddies, and somebody called me. It was like at noon with the news that this had just been announced out of nowhere, and I was so mad. Like I that might have been the fastest script I ever wrote, because I obviously only my straight to camera ones I have something prepared for, but that I went home and knocked that out. That was straight from the heart. So, and usually those are the ones that do the best. So. And obviously I wasn't the only one that felt that way. So it's still heartening. I will say the response from people on Facebook is one of the things that keeps me doing these videos, because there's obviously a lot of people out there who don't have a voice, who aren't given a voice, especially by the mainstream media. And really it's kind of a unbelievable opportunity and privilege to be able to articulate what all of these individuals are thinking.
And we just got your Facebook page up right now. As we've been showing your name key, we've been putting both your Twitter and your Facebook locations there. So let's just talk about it. They can find you at aarongunn.ca here on Facebook, and you're thanking them for 25 million views. It's a good number.
Yeah, it's been it's like I said, it's been one heck of a roller coaster ride. But whether it's talking about like the auto insurance rates here in British Columbia, or the statue, or these illegal blockades, it's each post always leads to a debate and important conversations that I think really aren't happening in this country and need to happen more often. Obviously, you guys are doing the same thing here at Regulator Watch.
Yeah, and do you find that your position is one that garners a lot of support on the street, or not? I mean, I know for a fact that I don't feel like when I'm walking around having coffee that everybody that's sitting around me in downtown Vancouver shares my opinions on the resource and environmental issues.
I think there's a lot more support than you might think for a lot of these issues. I definitely have had way more positive interactions than negative interactions with people coming up to talk to me about my videos. Definitely have had a couple negative ones, but the positives outweigh them 10 to 1 or 20 to 1. So I think there's a lot of people that get it. There's a lot of people who also aren't that political. They have busy lives. They have families. They have sports, school, work, all of that kind of stuff. So they don't have a lot of time to watch the news an hour every day or whatever, even though I always encourage that. So they really support just common sense messages being drilled down to them in a couple minutes where it's appropriate. So I think that's what I try to do, and those are the kind of people that I try to reach.
So let's two more questions with regard to this protest stuff, and then we'll move on to COVID. And the first question is this. If we were so lucky to have some of the protesters, and I'm talking about the ones that are really sharp on it. They're not the ones that are fellow travelers. They're the ones that are part of the team and they know the score. What would you say to them, Canadians now? Canadians that are militant and part of this whole process to shut down Canada. If you had a chance to talk to them right now, what would you say to them?
Well, I guess it depends on the format of that discussion. I would, of course, love and would always open to debate any of these individuals. They, of course, don't want to do that, which is very smart on their part. But I think that when it comes to the misinformation that they're spreading, they're doing it very purposefully. You mentioned like the people at the top. So I don't know how much I'd have to say to them about that. They know what they're doing. They know that I know what they're doing, and and they're doing a decent job of it. Now, I actually think that their tactics are probably counterproductive to their own cause over the medium to long term. I don't think they're winning a lot of new converts to their cause. Their whole point of the illegal blockades, of course, is to raise awareness, and they did that, but it just increased support for the pipeline, which you can see in polling since the blockades began. The other thing is they like to, I think a lot of these people are kind of living in the past, somewhat ironically. They like to point out that they're engaging in civil disobedience. I'm sure their heroes are, and rightly so. Things like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, these kind of people. But this might be the only civil disobedience protest in history where the people engaging in the civil disobedience have absolutely zero consequences for their actions. And the consequences are actually borne by everybody else, regular citizens. So in a way, this is kind of the inverse of all these movements that they claim to aspire to.
Right. So they're not experiencing the tragedy of their actions, and quite frankly, I mean, the whole country is slowly going to experience it as our economy gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And before we get to COVID, obviously, as well, is that when we have, these major issues happening like crash in oil prices and so forth, the country's even more vulnerable because, of course, our oil is landlocked. That's a whole reason why we need pipelines, is to get our oil out properly to the global market where we can get full rate for it. And so that's why, we're less cushioned than other countries.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, there's a whole, you could say the same for the fact that we're running massive deficits right now before there was any conceivable reason to do so. And now when there's an argument for fiscal stimulus, you've already run out of runway. The same thing goes with our oil and energy industry. It's in such rough shape because of terrible government policies, pipelines being first and foremost, but Bill C-69, Bill C-48, all these other regulatory burdens that have been placed on the industry, that when you get another hit like what's happening now, it's just an absolute doomsday scenario for them. So, and you see that reflected in the Canadian dollar and all these things. So it's obviously some of the stuff that's happened right now is unfortunate, but it was really up until this moment completely self-inflicted wound.
So here's what I want to ask you on the last bit, and it is going to transition us into the COVID issue. But this is with Canada's energy companies. Now, one side has been fighting, tooth and nail to shut down the resource industry. They've been using misinformation. They've been using leftist tactics, and they've been winning, public perception on these issues to the point where, Warren Buffett's pulling money out. It's a woke issue. It's not even just an environmental issue anymore. It's a woke issue now with regard to all resource extraction in Canada. It's been so tightly connected into colonialism and so forth and the oppressor ideology. It's tough. So you've got energy companies here in Canada. We've obviously covered and worked with energy companies over the years, and I've got a particular feeling that they've kind of let the fight down a bit. Otherwise, why would Jason Kenney, first thing he does is, try to build a war room for the energy industry? What's your position on that? What if you could give the energy industry in Canada some advice on how to fight these people, because they need it. They need that advice. What would it be?
Yeah, the energy industry. Well, I think you got to divide them into two camps, first of all. There's the really big corporations, your billion-dollar corporations, and they've been terrible. They've been horrific. They've been outspent, outmaneuvered by these radical foreign-funded environmental groups. There are some, for every big company, there's dozens of medium-sized operators. And when I say medium-sized operators, I mean, in the tens of millions of dollars. And I know a lot of them are fed up and they want to see change. The problem with some of these big corporations is in many ways they are, rent seekers. They hire kind of lefty PR people, government relations people, that kind of thing, because they're just trying to get into the government. They don't care if there's a carbon tax. They just want to make sure that the carbon tax doesn't negatively affect them. So they try to create and work themselves around the rules. And while doing that, over the last decade, they've lost a complete sense of the overall picture and how they're losing the overall battle. And you go through companies like Suncor, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really unfortunate to see that they're not on the ground defending their industry, talking about how much better life is made for billions of people around the world because of hydrocarbons, fossil fuels. Like, where would we be without natural gas and oil? The world economy would be a disaster. The mortality rates would be through the roof, all these different things. Oil and gas touches almost everything that we do. And people should be proud of that. People should be proud of working in the industry. Most of the workers are. So it would be nice to see some of the larger corporations stepping up to the plate and taking on these radical groups head on.
So you kind of did the perfect segue, actually, at least from our point of view. I mean, when we look at covering this issue with regard to the environmental protests against resources here in Canada, it seems pretty clear. If you want to bring down capitalism, right, you take out the resources. It's as simple as that. So, and what are the resources you take out? You take out fossil fuels. I mean, it is the Industrial Revolution. I mean, fossil fuels built capitalism. And so if you want to take capitalism down, you take out the fossil fuels. And that's one of the reasons why the climate change argument is so strong. It's so feverish. It's got so much religiosity to it, because it's trying to collapse the entire system. And, I'm sure we could argue maybe back and forth on that. That is how we see it. We believe the protesters. We believe the activists when they say they want to bring down capitalism. And then when you look at the Green New Deal, 12 years to like zero emissions, Greta Thunberg just said that last week, wants zero emissions by 2030. I mean, this means a total, complete change of the way that we work, we live, we teach, everything. So now we're at COVID, where the global public health community, progressive left, which runs regulations exist because of progressivism. You can't ever separate regulating from the thing that gave its birth, and that was politically progressivism. And so here we're in this spot right now where public health, together in its cabal, it is. I've got my tin hat is on my head right now. But the fact of the matter is that they're bringing down capitalism with this hysteria, are they not?
Well, the economy is being brought to a halt, obviously. I don't think, I'm sure this is going to become a little bit of a debate here, but I don't think that's, but now there's definitely lots of evidence of a couple these idiots, for lack of a better term, kind of cheering on what's been happening. But I don't think that doesn't mean, and I would never for a second suggest that this is somehow a manufactured crisis or anything like that. I think the 350 people who are dead today in Italy from the virus are actually dead today from the virus. So I think that it's real. I think that it's really bad, and of course it has huge economic consequences that are rippling throughout the global economy, and will probably continue to ripple. Hopefully for not the next year, but we'll have to see.
Well, so my question to you, and this is a great debate to have. I was excited actually to hear your position on this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is basically you don't think this is overblown.
No, I don't think it's overblown at all. I think it's been, I don't think it's overblown at all. And I think with any issue like this, I think the degree of uncertainty is higher than is being reported. And that's because people want certainty. So it's kind of crafted even if they don't have all the facts yet. So where this goes from here, I still think is unclear. But I mean, I just look at the numbers in Europe alone, and to say that it's not a serious issue, I think is a hard sell.
So the last big coronavirus that had hit with the swine flu back in the late 2010s, it had infected 750 million people on the planet, and we didn't shut down society. I mean, we're talking about a shutdown of society. Everything is shutting down. It's shut down. And then the government's coming in to bail out not just the economy, but just everything, the workers. It's a massive, massive, massive grab of power. And if we allow this to happen, won't it just be easy to do this again the next time? So again, let me make sure I'm very clear here. Never in the history ever of modern society have we shut down our entire modern society, yet when there's still only a couple of hundred people dead. It's 5,000 globally, but I mean, we're 8 billion people here. Is it your understanding that this virus is as infectious and deadly as like Ebola and yellow fever and all of that? I mean, from what I understand, it's a flu.
No, I don't think the numbers or the facts bore that out. And also, I think it's actually quite dangerous to kind of propagate that theory. I mean,
why is that? Why is that? Why is it dangerous?
Because if people don't take the proper precautions,
right, and
it continues to spread, then millions of people could die.
Okay, I know, but the spread is the hysteria. So currently right now in the 2019-2020 flu season in the US, I don't have Canadian numbers, but in the US, currently right now, there's 39 million Americans affected by the flu. 16,000 have already died. So, I mean,
Okay, so the flu rates, we can pull up the flu rates, but they're not even remotely close to the coronavirus fatality rates. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at this. If you have the flu hitting every year in Italy, why does the entire healthcare system not collapse in Italy every year? It's collapsing. If they didn't quarantine the country like they're doing now, and it continued to grow at an exponential rate, the healthcare capacity would be completely exceeded, and you'd have millions dead. So I don't think
millions dead. So that
across the world.
But where's the proof that coronavirus is that deadly? I mean, there's been worldwide 174,000 people infected that they know of, and out of the end 69,000 have already had it and gotten over it. So we're looking at. So I've yet to see proof yet that this thing is as lethal as they're saying it is. The numbers are showing that the mortality rate on it is under 2, might be a little bit over 1, but because we don't have any testing in the West, so the US completely has no testing, we don't have that huge number. So if we knew right now that there was 10 million Americans, or if we knew right now that there was 5 million Canadians that were infected with coronavirus, the mortality number on that would just plummet. So it is pretty convenient for us to not know how many people are infected. The more people infected, what that means is that the least likely this disease is to kill you. That's the real numbers, the straight numbers. But because we don't know how many's infected.
Yeah, so they don't know. I mean, look, we have, I do what I do for a living, as I'm sure you do, and engineers do. And doctors and infectious disease experts do what they do for a living. And all of the numbers coming out from there are between, well, around 2%. Definitely one can hope that it's closer to 1 because you're underreporting mild cases, of course. But look, it's common sense. Just like all the other things I talk about, it's common sense. If you look what's happening in Italy, it's not like the quarantine is causing all of this economic distress and isolation. Their healthcare system is basically shutting down. And that's with all of these crazy. Imagine if you had implemented no policies in Italy right now. How many people would have the disease? How many people would be dead? How many hospitals would have people dying out just on the street outside of them?
Dying on the street? Oh my goodness! This is not the plague, my friend.
I mean, are you watching what's happening in Italy right now? Because I have family over in Italy.
So you're emotionalizing it then from Italy's point of view. I mean, I can tell you right now, as a Western country, on numerous scales, I would never be comparing our country to Italy. It's a different country. For one, it's European. For one, it's in the heart of old school. Italy has plenty of its own issues in terms of the way that it thinks about certain things. Some cultures react differently to stress than others, right? And I think that's pretty clear. So, I can't say I can't make any comparison to Italy's healthcare system. We have a different healthcare system. We have a different approach to risk than other countries do.
Well, I mean, the healthcare professionals that do this for a living are taking this pretty seriously across the board. So,
sure, and allow me to only bring up the fact, and we won't get into, I don't want our conversation to be acrimonious at all. So let me just make the point that for the last 4.5 years, RegWatch has been covering these exact people, 3 videos a week. The Director General of the Tobacco Control Directorate at Health Canada has been on our show twice, and then the previous person in that job at the head of Health Canada has been on our show. So we talk to epidemiologists every single day for RegWatch. So on both sides of the vaping debate. So, I mean, we understand the continental divide that's inside public health that exists right now at this moment, where many, many researchers believe that epidemiology as a science is broken and has been completely devastated by the political actions from within inside the progressive part of the public health movement. And then we just watched the CDC, which is leading the charge on this, spend 9 months saying that there was an epidemic of youth vaping. Well, 18 months of that, and then about 6 months saying that vaping causes lung illness and kills you, when everybody in the vaping industry knew, including FDA in October, knew that it had nothing to do with traditional nicotine vaping products that you could buy that were regulated, and it was black market illicit cannabis products on the market in the US. And the CDC knew that too, but yet they still managed to deceive Americans about that issue right up until about 3 weeks ago. And then, COVID took off. CDC closed the file on it, put out a note and said, we'll no longer be reporting on the number of vaping-related lung illnesses. And off they went on COVID-19. And now if you don't call it Wuhan, or if you call it Wuhan, you're a racist. And that comes from out of the CDC, which controls the naming of all these things. So we don't have any faith in these experts because we've been covering them for 4 years and we know they lie.
I mean, I don't know. You can say that. I mean, it's everyday doctors and people working in the healthcare system that I talk to, people that are working here in BC Health. It doesn't matter the competence level or the political biases that some people might have at the CDC. The fact is that across the political spectrum now, it's pretty much uniformly, look, the virus doesn't care if you're left or right or what country that you live in. It's a virus. These have been going on for hundreds of years. It really shouldn't come as a huge shock or surprise to us that something like this is happening. But what's happening is happening. The numbers are real. What's happening on the streets in these various countries is real. It's not a end of the world scenario, like you said. We could continue our lives as we're doing now, and just if you're okay with seeing 1% of half the population that gets infected die. But I obviously don't think that that's a legitimate. I don't think that's something that we're willing to accept. Certainly not something I'm willing to accept. And hence the dramatic measures.
Fair enough. So what's the number then? Because most of the fatalities have been people who are much, much advanced in age and have pre-existing conditions. And that's not ever factored into the mortality rate here at all because, they're the ones most susceptible. We could have just done a major program that protected the elderly and so forth, but still kept our society and our economy operating. I mean, there is obviously some middle ground, considering that as a Western society, we've been dealing with these kinds of viruses forever. And, you said 100 years, a couple hundred years. The fact of the matter is that as long as our species has been on this planet, viruses and bacteria have been killing us. I mean, that's as simple as that. So in a normal process, this virus would have come in, and it's a novel virus, but it's not new. Coronaviruses are not some brand new bioengineered thing. This is a naturally occurring virus, so to speak, unless you are wearing a tinfoil hat. But, it comes into a population, And it's going to be a problem for people who have health problems. That's just natural. And for everybody else that gets it, they're going to fight it and they're going to build antibodies from it. And then after that, they've got new antibodies for a new coronavirus. And their kids that they have after that will have those antibodies too. That's how the human being, that's how the human organism, right, survives. The human organism doesn't survive by freaking out like this, right? We take the pathogen in and our bodies fight it. And nothing yet has shown that it would be any deadlier than something that might be just a little bit more than a flu. Like, the measles, for instance, is far more infectious and has far more dramatic impact on people's health than this coronavirus is so far, to be said. That's the point I threw out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I just look at that. I get caught like it has shut down the Italian healthcare system. It is blowing up in France, and this is with it partially contained. There is still you mentioned the flu. You mentioned the flu and you're trying to compare it. It has infectious qualities similar to the flu. But if you combine those infectious qualities with the deadliness of this, the flu does not hospitalize 20% of the people that get the disease, which is the best numbers that we have. And you can say, I don't trust the numbers. Well, that's fine. But you can't make a decision on a hunch, because viruses, it's not do you submit that this could be real, that this could be, or do you just submit that viruses can never be this bad?
No, I don't. No. Viruses, of course, can be horrible. So here's the deal. Of course, this is a virus. Of course, this is a coronavirus. Of course, it's out. Of course, it's getting around. Of course, that's what viruses do. The reaction is completely political, totally overblown. It's a power grab. It's designed to fulfill the. So progressives have a desire to manufacture what's called a moral equivalency of war. So short of war, they create moral equivalencies of war. And they use that to marshal the troops and mobilize the herd into doing and going ways in which that they believe that we need to take society in order to become better people. And that's
these aren't progressives. These aren't progressives doing it. Trump's
public health is progressive, and Trump is just following public health, just like everybody else.
So this is a progressives embedded in public health agencies of every country in the world.
Oh, no, you're missing it. No. Public health is progressive. Public health is a movement that is created by the progressive movement. Public health is created by progressivism. Progressives, when they came in and they reformed, they created public health. So it is the same thing.
Look, I don't buy that. I mean, people that work in this field, like doctors, like there's obviously some people have political bends, and hopefully you're right and was just overreacting to the situation. But I'd rather be on that side than underreacting and then having to reflect on millions of people who are now dead because we didn't do anything.
So let me ask you that. I got it. So let me ask you this question, because that's pretty stark, right? The death, right? So let me ask you this question. So then don't the environmentalists then have a really good point when they say that according to the precautionary principle, we take a look at the horrible reaction that our planet is having to all of the fossil fuels. And they will argue that the longer we keep raising the temperature of the planet, the more we're causing the death of the planet and the death of real human beings and everything else. So I ask you, is that not then of the same weight as the coronavirus? So if it's okay to shut down the capitalism for a time in order to prevent a few thousand deaths or 100,000 deaths, why not then shut down capitalism in order to prevent the warming of the planet?
Well, you actually make it's a great argument to look at side by side, because these and almost a timely one, because these activists have been using the terminology climate emergency, which actually has not been pushed back upon as it should have been by our politicians and people in the media, et cetera, because it's not an emergency. No matter where you are on the CO2 causing climate change debate, the fact is that this is a long-term challenge, a long-term issue, not one that is happening. If something doesn't happen tomorrow, or doesn't happen in the next 6 months, or doesn't happen on this this rapid ramp up timeline that there's going to be this catastrophe and thousands of people are going to die. That was actually why I openly mock it and use it as an example for ridicule and bad public policy. This is the exact opposite, and it's almost perfect timing. This is an example of something where literally, if you don't do something quickly, you don't take dramatic action, hundreds of people are already dying into the thousands, and it could become tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands if you don't take that dramatic action. That's not. We have evidence of this happening throughout history. So, like anything, nothing's a slam dunk. Like the warmer weather's coming. Who knows how this thing ebbs? You made the point, which is a very valid point, about how you don't know the exact fatality rate. Hopefully, there's lots of people that got the disease, but it was mild symptoms. They just stayed home, never got tested. So you're under-reporting the total cases, and thus over-reporting the mortality rate. But that also might not be the case. And there's also even worse case scenarios. And you see in Italy and some of these countries in Europe that have advanced healthcare systems just as good as Canada's, starting to crumble under the pressure and trying to put all of these restrictions in place. And if you want to call it hysteria, then I ask, what do you think would happen if they didn't put those restrictions in place?
I think there's a bunch of people that got sick in a cold, and in 10, 14 days, they'd be over it. I mean, honestly.
So why is the hospital system collapsing?
Well, because when you have a hysteria, you create all this pressure. All of a sudden, you're trying to shove all these people into the system.
They're running out of ventilators because of hysteria?
I don't know. The ventilator thing, look, I've been through this thing. I've been in television news now for 30 years, so I could do a litany of issues that are, when you're in the moment, that are grabbed by mainstream media and then shoved down people's throat. I can take it all the way back to the Iraq War in 1990 and the issues of the incubators for babies and stuff like that, and how they were getting thrown out by the Iraqis and this. I mean, you're guaranteed you're going to find one or two key things like this shortage of ventilator stuff, just taking over as a raison d'etre to help justify certain things. Happens all the time in every war. The left likes to create the moral equivalency of war. And so, as you know, globally, this is a marshaling, like a warlike marshaling against this issue, and it's bringing people's standing to attention to it.
There's no left-right response to this.
You're missing the point. You're missing the point. Hold on for a second. There is no such thing as a unity of thought amongst human beings on this planet. That's why there is war and we do kill each other. So to just say, well, let's put it all aside and not say politics are involved in an issue of, say, war and global pandemic, and you just can't do that. You can't just say, like, oh, nobody's thinking politically here. Thinking politically is not a right thing to do. The fact of the matter is that every decision that's made about war, about major economy, about major things with health and stuff like that are always impacted by politics. And I'm not talking.
I understand that politics affects every decision, but there's been no left, right. There's no one side of the political spectrum taking the virus not seriously and the other side taking it seriously.
Oh, well, that's not true. In the U.S., the Republicans are getting their butt handed to them because they've been trying to downplay it a bit, right? I'm downplaying it. I'm saying this is overblown. I'm saying this. Public health has completely failed. All of these healthcare systems you're talking about, these Western first world healthcare systems, our deal with them. The deal is, as taxpayers and as individuals, as citizens of Canada, right? Our deal is that we're going to grant you massive amount of ability to take away our individual liberty and our rights, right, in order to protect us in the event of a massive, massive health disaster, which would be Ebola, yellow fever, the plague, and stuff like that. We give that freely away. They've broken their agreement with us as healthcare people. They went completely from, there's a virus in China that's a part of the flu family, right? We don't know much about it. Now there's a few hundred cases in Italy, to shut down. And the whole apparatus of woke media has jumped right down on it. You see, if you bring up that this isn't the right thing, you're going to get stomped on. All the corporations have to follow through because they've got liability issues when it comes to following OSHA and Health Canada and public Health Canada, and all of the work regulations that are involved. So at some point, the corporations and the entertainment, all of them, they have to pull the trigger on this. Otherwise, they're going to be exposed to liability. And that's regulations that have done that. So at this point, you do have to look at it and go, well, they failed. They're supposed to be somewhere in between, shutting down our entire capitalist society and telling us that the way we live, work, go to school, our entire lives are going to change from this day forward. Bloomberg's just shoving out, crap. CBC shoving out crap, saying your life is forever changed now because of this. That's the politics of progressivism. Not the left, right, whatever you want. This is your life's changed. How has my life changed? Just to finish that point, there has to be somewhere in between shutting down Western civilization and taking care of a minor flu that could kill. That's all. That's the deal.
Minor flu.
Well,
flus don't kill have the potential.
Well, this one hasn't killed
people.
Millions, and there's been nothing to prove that
Spanish
it will kill
flu
millions.
In 1918 was
There's
not
nothing that proves this is the Spanish flu. Nothing.
It's absolutely destroying the healthcare systems of most of Europe. I mean, I think it's just so irresponsible to say that when you have all of these healthcare professionals, like doctors. I'm sure doctors. They're not out there to make a political point. They're out there to save lives. And if this thing gets out of control, and by the way, you made the point about wars, which is about governments coming in to take certain freedoms away in dire situations. Yes, that happens. And sometimes governments do it because they're trying to solidify political power, or they're trying to strengthen their hold on the state, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes you're actually in a war and governments are doing it for the national survival of the country. So both things happen. And our jobs, obviously, are to evaluate each situation. And I would put to you that the numbers that are coming in, that anybody can Google, that you can look, that are sites that just tabulate it, are real. And the growth of this is real, and the uniform political response across the political spectrum, left or right, shows that it is real. And that is, and the thing is, the stuff that's coming out of Europe, that is with dramatic action. So and what China did was even more dramatic. And the idea is that with dramatic action now, you can make it so this doesn't drag out and kill millions of people. So that's obviously what they're trying to do.
I agreed. And you can make that argument exactly for climate change. Exactly what you just said is exactly the argument for why we need to take immediate action on climate change. And we need to get to zero emissions, and we need to shut down the resource industry. Because if we don't do that now, right, millions of people will die because the flooding.
Except that's a lie, and this is actually happening. And the hospitals are actually bursting at the seams in Italy, and there's thousands of body bags across the world. And when they say that's happening with the climate change, that's not true. So that's the difference. Okay. There's a big difference. One is that it's actually happening, and one is a hypothetical challenge that we have to face over the next 50 to 100 years.
Well, just like climate change, I think with this coronavirus, I think there's a happy medium somewhere in between. And I don't think we found it yet with climate change. And I think we're just shooting way past it with coronavirus. So, but, obviously, I'm definitely not numbered. People, how I think on this issue is not in the high numbers. But our job as media is to be skeptical. That's what we do. And we like to put questions to power. And we don't trust experts because doctors I know a lot of doctors too. I've interviewed a lot of doctors too. That doesn't mean that they aren't as susceptible to believing things just like everybody else is. And of course, everybody wants to have, to be safe. And the precautionary principle is an extremely strong principle. And by the way, one of the reasons why we might be seeing some of the reaction in Europe be so strong is because the precautionary principle is embedded inside the European Union. It's definitely, held to the heart. It's actually in Canada's regulatory environment too. It's embedded in ours. In the US, it's not. They recognize that there's the precautionary principle, but they don't put it at the forefront of all regulation. And the precautionary principle, for people who don't know, is a principle that says that in the absence of science, but with a belief that a possible outcome could happen, it's your duty to stop the outcome, because you just got to play it safe, right? It's the old better safe than sorry, but in the regulatory environment, it's called the precautionary principle. And it was first brought in through environmentalism and public health together over a bunch of issues in the 70s, and it fought for in the 80s, and then got enacted into legislation in the 90s and the 2000s. And so it really does mean that if there's an absence of scientific evidence, but a real strong belief by the experts that a very disastrous outcome could happen, then the regulator, the experts have the authority to then stop that action from happening even before it starts. So, and it's called the precautionary principle.
Yeah, and I think that's what they were operating on a month ago, and now it's here. And they probably wish, I bet you if you ask every head of state in Europe, they wish they had done more a month ago. And that's, we're a couple weeks behind Europe. And look, there's always other approaches you can take. You could try to isolate and quarantine the vulnerable population and try to do it that way. I know the UK is doing a slightly different approach, but the fact of the matter is the only country that seems to have gotten this under control is China, and to a lesser extent South Korea, and they've done that through massive intervention, the likes of which might not even be possible here. So look, we'll see how I really do hope that you're right, and this is not a big deal. But if you look at the death rates in Italy and the hospital strain on Italy, and you multiply that out throughout the population, as the flu, a traditional flu would travel, the results are devastating. So, I don't think people are ready to just give up and let 500,000, or 100,000 Canadians die from this thing. So I think that's the trajectory that we were on without intervention, and we'll see if we can achieve a better result than that.
Well, it's definitely trying times. There is no doubt. So let's end on this note, Aaron. What's next for you? You've obviously got, a great track record here on videos on these issues, on a bunch of them. What can you tell us about your next projects that you're working on? What can people expect to see from Aaron Gunn coming soon?
Well, that's a nice segue there, because the news stories right now, I'm sure if you pulled up CTV or Global or something, would probably be all coronavirus. So I've got there's a couple videos that are actually already filmed. I'm just deciding if I'm going to be releasing them. And we're kind of in uncharted territories for the short term at least. But this will obviously pass. And in the medium long term, it's just to continue to speak to the issues that matter to Canadians, and specifically to ones or specifically to viewpoints that aren't being articulated in the mainstream media, at least as much as they should be. So that's what I'm going to continue doing. And on Facebook, on probably going to get onto YouTube here in a bit. I know we never got to talking about the limitations of Facebook. I know we both had our challenges. But just continue to do what I do. I mean, I love doing it, and it's just great to get the word out on all these important topics.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing a fantastic job, and I want you back on the show anytime. And certainly, obviously, we could do that maybe in a couple of months. I'll have you back on before that, but I'm saying, in 6 months from now, we should be doing a coronavirus update and see which one of us is, filled with shame. It's probably going to be me.
Yeah, well, the one thing I really appreciate, and I'm sure you appreciate it as well, that the right of center in this country is so much better at, is having these open and honest and frank discussions that just do not happen on the left, which is unfortunate. And because I would love to be able to do this with someone, have that coronavirus conversation with someone who's anti-pipeline, but of course none of them are willing to do it.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. There is zero conversation. They just won't have it at all. And here's a perfect example. Clearly, you and I have two opposing views on the coronavirus, very strong ones too, in fact, but we agree on so much else, right? So, and that doesn't get seen at all in the dialogue in Canada, there's no doubt. So, well, that's all. Stay right there for me, and I'll catch you just in 1 second. And that is it for this edition of RegWatch. So before you head off, please head over to support.regulatorwatch.com. That's support.regulatorwatch.com. And consider making a fun. I'm trying to squeeze money out of them here, and I'm choking up. Consider making a financial contribution to our coverage. It's easy. Just dig into your wallet, find a few dollars and toss them our way. Please cough on them if you want. I don't care. I'm a conservative. And so I think I'll survive the coronavirus. And while you're online, please don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.